I'm usually opposed to applause before the panel, so no, but thanks, Vijay, thanks to Bill for a terrific first session. We're going to have a discussion a little bit about the Internet of Things. Who's heard about it? Who's annoyed by the term already? All right now. I've had the privilege of being able to study this phenomenon for quite some years, along with a number of colleagues. Published a report last year. One of our observations, a couple of observations, just to share before we really start to...
seminal report.
Thank you. Start to pull out the insights from a terrific panel here. First of all, as much hype as there is about Internet of Things, and clearly there's a tremendous amount, what we're starting to find is, in fact, companies, including Bill's, are really starting to move along the journey of capturing value. And the size of the potential prize is enormous. $4 to $11 trillion is what we discovered. So sorry, Bill, if that's going to raise your numbers again. But only some of that actually is going to be captured by the technology providers. Most of it will be captured by the consumers and customers who end up using these technologies. And so there's huge amounts of potential there. But some things that I think are underneath the surface, as we looked at over 200 separate use cases, all of the value drivers for them in detail. First of all, as much as it's easy to talk about the consumer applications, right? I'm wearing a wearable, for instance. There's twice as much potential for value capture in B2B versus B2C applications. So, again, huge amounts in B2C, twice as much in B2B. Secondly, again, it's not the first time that we've put sensors and connected them to devices and the cloud in the world, right? But less than 1% of the data exhausted already is being generated ever gets used for decision making. So there's huge amounts of value just sitting out there in data that's already being generated. And then finally, if there is so much value, why haven't we captured it already? Again, some of these challenges, which hopefully we'll talk about, whether the technology challenges, Bill and Vijay talked about the challenges of dealing with just the sheer amount of data and the fact that it's real time, et cetera. But perhaps more importantly, the people challenges are even more challenging. So how do you, in fact, re-architect an organization in order to make decisions based on data that comes from IoT? How do you conduct experiments and design them properly, et cetera? And then, of course, interoperability. We discovered that of all the value that gets captured, or all the value that's available, 40% requires interoperability in order to capture. And again, we'll have a discussion about what that might require as well. So with that, you have the panelist details, so I won't go into deep introductions there, but maybe just start with a little bit of a definitional question. So David, you once had the privilege of authoring a book entitled?
Enchanted Objects.
So what are enchanted objects?
It's much better in French. They say objet enchanté.
Enchanté. Vraiment?
Well, enchanted objects I define as ordinary things that have an extraordinary layer of capabilities. And that's usually given by connectivity, by a connection to the cloud, by sensors, or by some representation of information. And for me, the sort of transformational product was Lego Mindstorms, which I worked on back in the 90s, which was embedding sensors in Lego bricks and computation in Lego bricks so that kids could not just create a structure that they imagined, but behaviors that they could imagine. And I worked on Guitar Hero, which was another breakout product, probably because it started with the bass as a guitar and then added gamification and a lot of fun and a lot of content on top of that traditional bass of the guitar. It started off as a joystick where you could play. There was a song structure. These were a couple of students at the Media Lab and at MIT where I teach. And you could play higher notes, lower notes, faster notes, or slower notes, but never the wrong note for Guitar Hero. But it was never successful as like a little thing that was this big, because it was hard to sort of jam on something that was small. But when it became big, like a guitar, then it became much more sort of resonant with people's music-making affordances, So I've been at the Media Lab working for the last few years on sort of ambient furniture, trying to think about not wearables, but the fixtures around us and how to embed technology into Skype cabinetry so that my kid can talk to my parents just by opening a portal, or I was just at this Amazon conference in Palm Springs over the last couple of days, and showed a trash can that does supply chain management for the house. So basically you tape a camera and a little bit of connectivity into the inside lid of your trash can, and then it sort of notices what you throw out. And that all worked, except it was a little bit boring. So, just ordering something else, that you've just tossed out is boring. So we've embedded a character in the trash can. This one was named Oscar because he was sort of grouchy. And he would just give you shit about what you threw out. If it was like the third box of cookies this week, or like coconut milk all the way from Asia, or, and he would sort of propose like a better replenishment alternative. And if you didn't like the idea, you just kick the can. But
down the road.
But seriously, like this was before Amazon came out with the dash button, which I think is just transformational about, redefines path to purchase. If you've got a Tide button sitting on your washing machine and a Gillette button sitting behind your, where you normally store your razor blades, and just like circumvents all of the planogram, shopper marketing spend that happens if you just do auto replenishment in the home. So that's sort of one of the value props of connectivity.
So these enchanted objects, to a certain extent, combine the physical world with the virtual world, might be one way to put it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was a lot of talk in the last panel about software is eating the world, but I really think where these things become embedded in your life is when the software makes its way back into the most ordinary things everywhere around you, not into the cell phone, but when the apps sort of leap off the cell phone and become embedded in pill caps and mirrors and cabinetry and tables and all the stuff that we're used to having around us, cars.
So Raj, Qualcomm, you talk about not just the Internet of Things, but the Internet of Everything. Is that describing a little bit when you combined these physical objects, the atoms with the virtual world?
Well, I mean, at Qualcomm, I'm in the chipset division of Qualcomm, where we make processors and connectivity that goes into all these objects, and that David and the people in the industry are talking about. It's actually very interesting for us to see the growth of the market. Clearly, we've done a reasonable job in smartphones, and smartphone as a device is really started that trend. And a few things that we've observed over time is that we've kind of changed the perception of how people view devices and what devices should do once you get used to a smartphone. So, for example, the fact that you have a device that's not always connected, it seems like a strange concept now, because you have your phone that's always connected. And although it was not that long ago that you're used to like dialing up to connect to your computer, now you don't even think about that it has to be connected, of course, right? And I think, and the fact that screens are not touchable and don't react when you touch. I mean, you see, if you have little kids now, they go to your TV and touch it and do anything, they get upset. The iPad does it, why doesn't, So I think we've changed the perception of how things are supposed to behave. And what that has done for us at Qualcomm is the technologies we've built into these phone processors, which is always on connectivity, low power, high performance, great user experience. We are finding that people want the same kind of experience in most of the things around them. So I like to tell this small anecdote, and then maybe we can move on to the next topic. Is many times people think of fit bands. How many people wearing fitness bands? See, there you go. So they all started. Everybody wanted a fit band, and we found that usually people wear them for about 6 weeks before they kind of get rid of them. And one of the reasons is because you have this band, and it's got a couple of lights that blink when you connect a phone and whatnot. But if you're like me, you're in the gym and you're working out and whatnot, you want the instant feedback on how many calories you burn, because that machine is such a pain in the ass. You want to get off it, but it doesn't tell you. So you have to pull out your phone, but it's hard to pull out your phone because you put your phone in the locker. So that's when fitness bands really started popping up little displays to get that feedback. We call them smartwatches, but in any case, the interesting thing is when we put the display on it, what we found is that we thought, well, it's just a display and a fitness band, we'll give them some low-level processor. We actually found that most of our customers, I spend a lot of time with people who make these products. I think I just got a note yesterday, we launched our 100th watch design using Android Wear, is that they wanted a mid-tier Snapdragon processors to put into that watch. And that's a pretty high-performance processor. And I was wondering why that is. And then you find out that most of those displays have 640 by 480. And anytime a display doesn't react at 60 frames per second refresh rate, you think it's slow and cheap. So it's amazing what we've done, because if you just go to like a Best Buy or something, or a Verizon store, everybody gets a phone, and that does cut a number before they buy a phone. Like, it's going to tell them something about how fast it is. And it really is, because the GPU performance at 60 frames per second on that complex UI takes a lot of processing. And what we are finding is that's what people want on their other connected objects, is that class of performance. So what that's doing to us is, while we just started selling connectivity, very quickly we're selling complex application processors into very, very simple devices. And that's created a huge growth of business for us. And that's the way we think about these things, is always on, connected. And you don't want to think about how they're connected, they're just connected. And the performance is what you expect from a smartphone to be in all these other devices. That's a natural.
Can I pick a fight?
Please.
I feel like you're talking to the wrong people, right? Like, people who, like, I would argue that people hate pixels on wrists. Like, you're talking to people who are sort of fetishizing frame rates and pixels, but I have this watch from Withings, and there are no pixels to be found, and nobody gives me shit about, like, how's your smartwatch and how often do you charge it. It's an 8-month battery. It has an accelerometer inside. It shows me on an analog dial, which everyone mistakes as a vintage watch sort of visual for how many steps I've walked. It measures my sleep. But it looks like it's aping and using the visual vocabulary of an ordinary thing. And I think there's so much of a larger opportunity, not in fast Snapdragon things, but my last company, which I sold actually to Patrick Soon-Shiong, who's here in LA, was a internet-connected pill cap company. So we used the cheapest, lowest power, 8-9-month battery TI chipset, which just talked across the room to a AT&T cellular modem. But there are 3.5 billion scripts written in the US every year. So it's a much bigger opportunity than connected cars.
Absolutely.
It doesn't need all this power.
Absolutely. It reminds me. I'm glad that you're mentioning that, because it reminds me of someone like you. I was in a panel who said, who needs a smartphone? We just need to make phone calls. And I think now you look around and say, really? So I think most things start like that. But I think what happens is, I remember people saying, who needs a digital camera more than 1 megapixel? I'm kind of dating myself. But what happens is, when users start using them, the point I'm talking about is something a little different. I was trying to give you guys a little feel for how complex these processors are that do it. But you're right. If that complexity comes across in a way that it's complex, then we haven't done our job. But what happens is, to make a very simple, useful thing that everyone wants needs a lot of complexity in performance. And that's the beauty of what it is, right? Because, like, for example, you come into the house and some people ask me, hey, I want a light bulb, that connects. And then they say, well, okay, we got a connected light bulb. Then the question comes up, is it Zigbee or Z-Wave? And then is it Bluetooth? So what happens is, I was talking to the Philips guys who make light bulbs, and they said, well, we don't like to call them light bulbs. We don't like to call them lights. We like to call them as illumination. And then you think about, why is that? And the argument is actually very interesting. You guys may not appreciate this, but if the light is only on or off, there's only a certain thing it can do. But an on or off light is like a sound that's loud or low. It's not like music. But when you're able to change the light, the content, the ambience, how it reacts, there's a whole new experience. If you actually get some of the light bulbs, and if you're reading, you press a button, it's a different light. If you're relaxing, it's different. Now suddenly, it's still very simple to use, but to make a light that actually does that and lasts for a long time needs tremendous amount of complexity inside. Because you don't want someone else to log in and hack your light and turn your lights on when you're away. So you need a pretty...
That's happened to me.
It's happened to you, but I tell you, the amount of processing power and complexity it takes that you can't hack the light is actually tremendous. And so that's why the simplest things are the ones that have most complex technology in them.
They do, but they may not need pixels to represent the information, I guess is my point too.
I was just the one aspect of it. Yeah. Connectivity, pixels. But talking about pixels is something else you guys might like. I was just back from Baselworld, one of my team in there. Michael Kors, how many of you know Michael Kors? Michael Kors launched a bunch of smartwatches, which look fantastic. And here is the thing. These are all smartwatches, but the dial is actually done by the Michael Kors designers that are out there. And when you look at the watch, you can't tell if it's pixels or not. But here's the beauty of it. You can download a bunch of dials from there, and they automatically change every day. So if you're wearing pink dress, it'll be pink. So you don't have to buy that many watches. So that's why I'm saying, people think of pixels but that's the beauty of these things, is that how they finally end up in your life is very different from how they first start. Right?
Is it the matrix or skeuomorphism? All right, we'll come back to this. Actually, it's so interesting, right? We have both sort of the technology supplier view and the technology. How many people are from technology companies, let's say, that provide technology? Interesting.
I think it's going to be easier
high
for me than you,
percentage.
David.
Yeah, this guy might be coming out. How many are from technology applier companies? That's very interesting, right? So actually a predominance of technology supplier companies here. Well, that maybe just, this panel is really about the business impact of IoT in addition to smartwatches. David, we had talked earlier about how business models potentially could shift as a result.
Right. So at Amazon, I said, how's the dash button going? Like, how many have you sold, and how often do people replenish? And they said, it's actually sort of a Trojan horse for just doing a good API so that a deal with Brother can automatically reorder paper for your printer, a deal with Samsung can reorder ink for your printer, a deal with Brita can automatically replenish your water filters. So they really see it more as a way to sort of imbue people's homes and lives with sensors that can sort of encourage more flow and flux from Amazon. But on the pre-call, I remember I told the story of a company that's doing yet another smart toothbrush.
That's a good one, actually.
And it's called Beam Brush. They're trying to compete with Oral-B. But I interviewed the CEO and I said, what's your plan? You're going to sell motors and brushes, or you're going to sell razors and blades, like a bristle business plan, sort of like what Amazon's doing? And he said, no, there are 100 million people in the US who don't have dental insurance because it's expensive. It's like $50 a month. But if you had a probe in everyone's mouth every day and knew what their brushing habits were, then you can sell $30 or $20 dental insurance to people that have good oral hygiene. So he saw it as, as shifting the business model and sort of monetizing the reduction of risk that comes from the knowledge, which I think is, really profound in terms of sort of a tertiary business model about an understanding and a risk reduction.
Yeah, and I find myself weirdly talking with more and more insurance companies because viewing things as a set of risks is an interesting orthogonal way to think of things.
Yeah.
If we flip back over to the technology side, though, then between putting the Snapdragon into your toothbrush versus the cloud, and people talked about fog computing. Do you put fog in your mouth? I mean, how exactly do you think about this?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about cloud. I was just listening to the person from GE talk about cloud, and it's a word that gets used. I think it's more used than IoT, although I think IoT will change and become more used than cloud.
It'll become Enchanted Objects.
Enchanted Objects in French. But what I do find is that, ironically to me, I get asked this question a lot. If all this computing is in the cloud, why do you need processing at the edge? Or the other way, hey, if you got so much processing in the end devices, why do you need the cloud? It reminds me of I don't know, maybe some of you are in the same age as me, is this whole concept of when I did my grad school, you had the IBM 360 where you put punch cards and did it, and there was a big mainframe, and everyone else was dumb and had punch cards. It moved on to VT100 terminals and still the mainframe. And then it moved on to a bunch of PCs that are distributed and distributed databases and never needed the mainframe. And now it's the cloud, and you just need sensors. So it's kind of, to me, like it just changes every few years. And I think what happens in my mind is that the more you put somewhere else central, and let's call it the cloud, the more you put on the edge. And that seems kind of strange. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you went and bought a camera, and like Dropcam or any of those cameras, and stuck them outside your house to know who's coming. Well, first thing, you're really excited because now you can see the video of when people are coming and whatnot, and so on. It feels secure. Very soon you'll find that, hey, I'll put some notifications so when something moves in front of my house, I get it. And soon you'll find that you want to turn that feature off because anytime a car goes down the street or leaves rustle, or it has no smarts in it at all, and it just gives you a notification anything happens. And you want to put a little area, it still doesn't work. Then you realize, why can't this stupid camera be a little smarter and just tell me when a stranger comes to the house, and not when a dog or just my wife opening the door? Because all this data is being shipped onto the cloud, stored somewhere, and the gigabytes of it, and they're charging you $20 a month to monitor it. If the camera was a little smarter, it would only put the stuff that I'm interested in. Now suddenly we are selling a whole bunch of Snapdragons into cameras. And we were like, before we just sold Wi-Fi, now we're selling Snapdragons, because now what has happened is, one, the processing still is in the cloud because you still need to store it, but there's a lot more intelligence at the edge. But even more interesting is the business model, what you're saying has changed. Because when you have a smart thing outside, you don't need the $30 a month to store all this data. You can pay $5 and store less data because the device is figuring out what data to be stored. So it's very interesting when you move the processing from the cloud to the edge, to the edge, to the cloud, and who makes money and what the data models are itself changing, right?
And I guess furthermore to all the data, you can do deep learning on all the photos that are uploaded,
Right.
so you can figure out who's family and who's not family,
Right.
and who's a frequent thief.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And have a loyalty program. No, but
And sell insurance.
but interesting, right? Just all these capabilities, right? From physical design
Right.
to ubiquitous computing
Right.
to cloud, deep learning, et cetera. Very few organizations will be able to be totally vertically integrated on that. Dave, could you talk a little bit about what the role of partnerships might be, and in some cases, there are unlikely partnerships that are appearing.
Yeah, I'm intrigued with these strange bedfellows that get together. Like, you'd think Apple's a fashion company, but even they're partnering with Hermès. Is that how you said it? Yeah, Hermès.
Oui.
For the to do the leather that goes with your Apple Watch. So Misfit, who was sold to Fossil for $300 million or something, did a partnership with Swarovski, the crystal company, in order to get distribution and to sort of try to get some of that sort of fashion prestige and prowess. So I'm seeing more and more like really interesting partnerships come about. Just recently, I actually at this Amazon conference, I presented with the guys that invented August Lock. And I don't know if you saw, but they have an ecosystem now, right? So they're like, August is not getting into all the things that people might pass through your door to need to achieve, but they partnered with WAG, which is a dog walking company, with Wash.io, who will now, you can email a key to the company that comes by and picks up your laundry, with Alfred, which is sort of like a butler service for the house, a cleaning service. So now that you have a part of your house which has this connectivity, now you can broker and probably get affiliate fee benefit, affiliate fees for all of these services that are passing through the door. I mean, other examples that we thought of in terms of interesting atoms meet bits, products meet services, were the Anoto pen, which has done a deal with Adobe and also with Evernote. Because if you have an internet-connected pen that stores gestures and stores what you've spoken about, now you need a cloud to do search and to integrate that with other things in your life. So I'm intrigued with I think there's a role for everybody here to sort of think about those collaborations, those partnerships, how they get structured, how they get promoted.
Any thoughts about how you think about these partnerships? Because now you no longer look within your own ecosystem. How do you?
Yeah. Well, sort of back to furniture, you think about sort of a map of capabilities and how to wed those capabilities together. I think it also goes to brand, though, because the reason why we're psychoanalyzing furniture and sort of asking it like, well, what do you really want to be about? And the coffee table says, I'm about communion. I'm a low table. I'm about conversation and communion and discussion. And so you say, well, maybe you want Facebook photos to emerge out of the koi pond of your Facebook table. And so like, is it named the furniture company, or is it named the service company? Is sort of an interesting question, or some marriage of those two. And I think it has a lot to do with how these things will be promoted and understood, and maybe the privacy ramifications of those things too.
Yeah, there are all these connections, right, at the commercial level, but then the connections have to happen at the technical level too, right? And there are all these standards appearing on the technical side, right? If you're going to actually have partnerships or API connections, et cetera. Any thoughts on how that's all going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I want a job at Media Lab. I think he has like all these cool things thinking about Facebook coming from table. But the interesting thing we do, what we find is that, ironically, a lot of people ask me like, what are the big use cases for IoT? What partnership needs to happen, and how are the things going to come together? We find that the simplest use cases are the ones that drive most volume. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is we sold, I think...
Did you say volume or value?
Volume of devices that come out. I mean, and the value comes from there, because first you got to get them out there connected. We found that there's 10 million air conditioners we sold connectivity into in the last 6 months in China, just China. And we were like, what are they doing with like all these connected air conditioners, right? And actually, and everybody talks about, kind of like, what David talked about, different use cases, different models, different things. And I met the CEO of Haier or Hisense, or one of those big air conditioning companies, and I asked him, what are you guys doing with all these chips? I mean, and actually what he said was very interesting. He said, well, a lot of people buy these air conditioners, and in China and places like that, even in India and places like that, the air is not so great, the temperatures are hot, electricity is expensive. Most people just want to turn on their air conditioner before they go home because they got a 30-minute commute. So the room's at the right temperature when they get there. That's it. You don't really need a lot more than that to start it. Now, of course, they get another benefit that they'll know how is the freon levels, what's happening, they get a maintenance contract, and so on. So I actually think that in many of these cases, the best-selling applications are the ones that provide immediate value that's easy to grasp. Now, other partnerships, other things will happen over time, and new business models will evolve and so on. But and then we started talking about what are the other things people want connected, and I get this wackiest ideas. There's one woman I was talking to. She said, "Oh, I was telling the story." She said, "You guys should think of making a hair straightener connected." And I thought, what a strange thought. Then I was talking to my wife. She said, it's a great idea. I was wondering why. And then she said, one of the problems, I think there's some women in the audience, one of the biggest problems with the hair straighteners, apparently, is that if the auto turn off, they don't do a good job. So most women are afraid after leaving the house, shit, I left my straightener on. So if you could turn it off from away, I think that's a huge value. I think there is a great, so I actually think that the simplest ideas will drive most volume. And once you get there, sure, you want to know if no one is in the house, your thermostat talks to the hair straightener and turns it off, and that kind of stuff. But there's a home and away button on that, right? So, but the simplest things I find is actually the ones that provide most immediate value to the end consumer, right?
But if you could turn it on remotely, that would be a tremendous cybersecurity risk, right?
Right. So that's a very good question you ask, is how do you manage the risk of security? And actually, that is probably one of the biggest problems we need to address. And actually, we've done a fairly good job on smartphones, honestly. If you look at all the people in this room and you ask the question, how many of you guys had your smartphone hacked and data stolen? I usually ask a question like this, and I barely find one or two hands.
Because they don't know that it's happened.
No, not. No, it's because we built really good processors that have terrific security in them. Actually, I do say that half-jokingly, but we spend a lot of time, and me, by saying, us, Apple, I mean, you saw all that discussion, Google, and everybody has done a lot of work in the ecosystem to make sure that these things are very, very solid. And we've learned how to make, trust zone and secure boot and roots of trust and so on, that it takes a lot of effort to break into these things. And that's the same technology now that we feel there's an opportunity to roll into the things in the home. So that you feel that kind of security. And of course, they can be improved and a lot more can be done. But there's a lot of good technology out there that can make those pretty solid.
We're going to come out with questions, so feel free to move towards the microphone. But please, yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of volume and your security, I have to say, one of the business that I'm currently doing is trying to make sense of all of this data exhaust from all of the cameras of the world.
Right.
And you may not know this, but all of the pictures that you post on Instagram and Twitter are going through Amazon's cloud and being interpreted for all of the products and the brands and the faces embedded in those photos. And it's sort of, they're public photos, right, that we're processing at Ditto. But it's sort of an interesting case of cloud meets big data meets big deep learning, and getting this sense of like what are the affinities of all the people in this audience? Like what kind of vacationers are you? Or who's a foodie? Who's into who's shopping for a car? Who wears which type of jewelry? Like all of that is out on the internet. It's public, and it's now interpretable in a way that has never been possible before. So that's either a security threat. It's a personalization opportunity, I guess.
It's a good and a bad thing. It's a good and a bad thing, right?
So, but before we go, back to the audience, do you have any comments about privacy, particularly as, I heard a murmur in the crowd as you started talking about all their pictures being scanned by your company?
Well,
I don't know what pictures they have.
to me, the sort of existential question is, are people aware of the technology?
No, that's right.
Because we're not violating any laws because the photos are public. But I mean, the sort of interesting thought experiment I do is, like, let's say somebody invented a telephoto, you're sitting there with a camera, a telephoto nose that could smell from like 1,000 feet away, right? So, and they installed it in a mall, like in a private place. And to what extent would that be a violation of privacy to be able to say that person's wearing cologne, like Rick put on speed stick, like, all of the, maybe, I don't know. But like, to what extent is that a violation of privacy if you didn't know that you could be smelled at a distance?
Excellent question. What other questions do we have? There's one in the middle here. If you could wait for the microphone, please.
That's funny.
Manas Kanungo here. We heard a lot about the consumer-driven day-to-day area. It's like, everybody should be doing that. And then we heard, refreshingly, about the industrial area, right? What about the healthcare sector?
Mm-hmm.
What about personalized medicine? How about population health? What about giving better care in the hospitals?
Yep.
What's happening there, and how does the business model from the consumer side, which GE recognized to be not the way should be done in industry, how should that move in the healthcare sector?
Raj, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, we have some effort on healthcare and Internet of Things in healthcare at Qualcomm. I think it's really going to be very, very different in time. We're just at the beginning of it. I mean, even simple things. You kind of see from the way I talk about things, I like to see simple applications that work, and then the bigger ones come. We just recently announced a partnership with Novartis where you can get an inhaler, and that's got some smarts in it. And every time you take it, it knows how much you took, and whether you took it or not, or metering of it, and automatically order refills and so on. Just my son used to be asthmatic, but just you send it someone with a kid, and just the peace of mind of knowing that is a huge benefit. Then we are looking at medicines that you take, and they got little sensors in them, and once you take the medicine, it'll sense information to your phone. I've talked to some people where they make drugs that go in, and if you have things like heartburn and whatnot, they will detect the pH level in the system and only turn on when your pH in the heart, in the stomach is at the wrong level. And it'll communicate. And older people, you give them medicines, they know if you took them or not. There's one. And then the whole information about how the drug is actually working on you, that stuff is out there, and you can put it out there. And then the doctors and the physicians and the networks have this information, and then they know how efficiently this is working or it's not working. I mean, it's a huge area, and we spend a lot of time on that. Having connectivity and information gathering and technology into things you take every day or use every day, and having just that information connected in a way that you can take meaningful information out of that, I think it's a huge thing. And on a completely different note, Qualcomm announced this thing called the X Prize for a tricorder. I was at the Abundance conference with the other day with Diamandis, and they were talking about this X Prize, being this tricorder that will be diagnose symptoms, from people at the same level as a team of 10 doctors would. So you have this device, you get up in the night, you cough, your kid's coughing, you don't know if you're taken to the emergency room or not. You put in front of his face, he coughs, and then you get the diagnosis that says, no, he's okay, he's just got a little virus. I think just having that kind of devices, it's not that far away.
It's $10 million for whoever develops the tricorder, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big money. And another way to think about it is, right, we do predictive maintenance in industrial automation. You could do predictive maintenance on the human body as a machine, right?
Yep.
Change, repair, and replace to predict and prevent, not only on a turbine, but on a person. What else do we have? Question? Go ahead.
Just a quick, my last company was in medication adherence, so I've been to a lot of health conferences and thought a lot about it. But to address your business model questions, there are two new business models that are available, and one is, I think, with the medication packaging that we did, we charged pharma companies as a % of the lift that we could affect. So if somebody took their let's say diabetes med, which is a $10 a day pill, 30% more often, we took 20% of the upside of med sales for the change in behavior.
That's driven by prescription, not by lift.
It's measured by lift in revenue to the pharma company. So that's something, if you can say this
more
product
effective
is
now.
about behavior change and we'll only charge you for success, that's a model that Weight Watchers and other people
Very
should be adopting too. I mean, and then the classic one is the risk reduction one, right, in healthcare, where if you can say we can reduce hospitalizations and we'll take a piece of that savings as well.
And your product was on Colbert, which couldn't have hurt.
That's true. Yeah.
What other questions do we have up there?
Thank you. My name is Pedro. So question for David and Raj. It seems like you both have a really empathetic understanding of the problem in applying these new types of technologies. Just wonder if you could talk about your process that you go through, what questions you ask to frame those issues.
Well, I try to stay I'm at MIT, which already has a bias towards tech, and I sort of have to train students out of that. So we usually start with bringing in crazy people together. Like I teach a class and I bring in a magician, and we talk about stagecraft and emotional arcs and experience and sort of how to integrate some of the tropes of magic into furniture or into someone's day. And even something we did years ago when I was at Viant with some of these knuckleheads that are in the audience, was we do Dilos, day in the life of videos. So it's still a really effective tool to sort of back solve from let's theatrically come up with what we want this to feel like. How do we want this to change someone's life? Like, what's the vision for, like we just did one of these with Fisher-Price about the future of toys. And we had 20 ideas that could be embedded in a 3-minute video that helped the leadership team and the engineering team and everybody sort of have a vision for a North Star for where we were, what we wanted to make. And then that drove a lot of the reactions, a lot of the prioritization. And so I really encourage people to sort of do Hollywood on their visions before you think about frame rates and pixel densities and that sort of thing.
We're in Southern California, after all.
Yeah.
Anything else? Yes.
My name is Gideon, and I wanted to ask a question about Internet of Things democratization. When do you see we'll be in a place where everybody can go to Home Depot, buy a couple of devices, come back, and make IoT-enabled any device at home?
Hasn't that happened? I mean, it's like you have an Amazon Echo. It talks to IFT. It talks to If This Then That, which is an app that everyone should try because you can do these one-line rules, and you can get it to talk to your lights and your hot tub and everything else, and you can buy Arduinos and Crickets and other little.
I think the point he makes is democratization, where everybody can do that. I think people like you and me can do that, but if you poll how many people know If Then If, I think it's a very, very small percentage of the population.
How many people have that app and have tried it?
Well, this is not a good audience. If you only if
Don't blame the audience.
Well, the problem is if I only sold chips to these guys, I'd be out of business, right? That's the problem. We kind of look at the masses of people. When will my wife go out and buy a connected light bulb and not think about it and it works, right? Actually, that's a very important question. We ask that question a lot at Qualcomm, particularly because for chipset suppliers like us, it's kind of like more rooted to the ground in the sense we only get paid if we ship billions of something. We don't get paid for 10 apps out there or 50 apps or 300 people in the room that can kind of understand what we're talking about, which actually gives you a little bit of grounding in reality. And what I tell people is that there are some big problems to be solved. For example, it is not that easy. We launched Bluetooth light bulb, we do LifeX light bulbs. It's not that easy to bring them onboard them, connect them. I mean, I can do it, my son can do it, he's 15, but most people can, right? And because they got other things to do in life rather than fiddle around with access points and light bulbs, right? So I think there is a problem to be solved, which is how do you make these things dead simple and easy to use?
Solve that.
And and they get solved, and a lot of these things get solved because right now we solve the problem on smartphones. That's why most everybody uses them, because when the fast starts, like when my 80-year-old dad is saying, hey, I need to get this WhatsApp thing, I know that we've solved the problem because all his friends have one. So we solve these problems. I mean, in the industry, we solve them. We solve them to the point where people use them, but it takes time. It takes time and it takes evolutionary aspect. The keys to solving them, in my mind, is the first thing is interoperability. Like for example, web browser became so popular because when you open a web browser and people launch a web, they don't worry about either H.263, H.264, WME, Flash. No one cares anymore. It just works. Videos just play. Links just work. It wasn't that long ago when it would say video format not supported, right? So I think what happens is we've evolved this APIs and we've evolved these software abstractions to the point where common people who got other important things in life than worrying about technology, things work. I think that needs to happen for Internet of Things in the point where whether you bought a LifeX light bulb, or whether you bought a Hue light bulb, or whether you have a Nest thermostat, or whether you have an Apple HomeKit, it should not matter. They should just all work.
Somebody should do a pairing standard based on an app like Bump. Do you remember Bump? It was an app like you sort of bump fists, and you use the accelerometry in the phone and the GPS to say, oh, you two bumped, and then you can trade like business cards or whatever. Somebody should do that for Internet of Things. So when you get into the rental car and you get the phone and you just want to pair your phone, you're just like, boom, and you tap it, and the accelerometry in this and the car sort of, just does the pairing.
Yeah, I mean, and actually the interesting thing is those things will happen, and the reason they will happen is because those are not. We have the technology to do it. They are not difficult problems. They're just a question of time. Because many people tell me, hey, all these standards, how do they connect? And I actually tell them, it's just software. You just write APIs that translate and it's done, right? I mean, it's not really that hard. It's just a question of time. It's not a VHS versus Betamax war where these things are two funny-looking objects. They don't fit into the same thing. All these are just software standards, and that's why I like to use a web browser analogy, where you just build abstractions and APIs. And what that happens is, to David, your point, when you have to abstract and when you have to translate between multiple standards, when you have to make the experience seamless, you need a ton of processing and a ton of memory. Because at that point, that's why you start putting intelligence into these things to make them easier to use, actually.
So, speaking of time, we're almost out, but real quick, very quick answers on the lightning round here. Ready? Which IoT use case is most disconnected from reality? Raj?
Most disconnected from reality. The bump one.
David?
I think the application is most disconnected. Like people actually using their phone as a remote control for anything around the house. I think the 3 seconds it takes to launch the app to control shades, lighting, or whatever is just totally wrong-headed.
What's your favorite source of information to learn more about IoT, David?
McKinsey Global Institute report.
Raj?
Customers.
If you have one piece of advice for the people in this room and who are watching through streaming, what is it?
I'd say think of IoT as not a pie in the sky, but what can you do next 6 months, next 8 months to make a business impact?
David?
Yeah, hire a magician, read Enchanted Objects, and think about the user experience first.
Great. Please thank our panel.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.